country.
All right, and from Homa Bay, let's start our discussion on the state of the nation, where we talk about matters, politics, and everything in between there. We'd like to hear your views on every subtopic that we're going to talk about. At Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya, use the hashtag Daybreak. We're going to talk about the Mandamano being called off. We're going to talk about MCAs demanding a salary hike, retirement of President Uhuru Kenyatta, and there's also a proposal here on the front page of the Daily Nation of the Leader of Opposition office, which drew different views. We'll talk about that shortly. But our guest in studio, Honorable Dan Manzo, is here. Senator for Makueni, asante sana for making time. Honorable Kuria Kimani is also here, Member of Parliament for Molo. Thank you so much for making time. Nerima Wako, Executive Director, Siasa Place. I almost called you Honorable. Thank you so much for making time. The future Honorable. Thank you for making time, Nerima. Let's look now at the front page of the Daily Nation. Closing ranks. Hope at last. Rival camps allied to President William Ruto and Azimio Chief Raila Odinga yesterday struck a compromise on the bipartisan talks after Kenya Kwanza withdrew Jubilee's Aidan Canaan from the MPs committee, and the opposition side called off today's planned protest. The two sides also closed ranks on a proposal to amend the constitution to create the office of the Leader of Opposition. We'll talk about that shortly. But Kimani, I'll start with you on this. Do you see this holding, or is it still a game of hide and seek? Or is it some level of blackmail? If you do this, then I do that. If you don't do this, this happens.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Azimio team for really taking the bold step in taking out protests out of the city. We are losing a lot of money in terms of whether it was revenue collected, whether it is the investments that we look forward to attract in Kenya in terms of foreign domestic investment. So this is a big win for the country. Without getting too political on it, I would really say that I must congratulate them for doing this. However, it's quite unfortunate that it had to take the time it had to take, because by the time they are calling off protests, we had an entrepreneur who had his bus burnt down to ashes along Gong Road. We had a truck that was burnt down. We have police officers that are dead. We have innocent Kenyans that are dead. And we have very many people that lost their livelihoods or their small businesses during the protests. So I really wish that this came out a little earlier, because we didn't have to go all this way just for selfish gains. Because when I listen to the entire conversation, whether it is because they say that the reason why they withdrew from the protest was because we agreed on our side to withdraw the candidature of the Honorable Aidan Canaan from the negotiation team. How does it matter? You know, how would it have mattered? Aidan Canaan had nothing to do with the buses that got burned, the truck that got burned, the people that lost their lives, and even the conversations that were talking about opening servers and all that. You and I know that there's nothing like that. So it took a lot of blackmail, and I think I must also congratulate the president, because he disagreed to yield into the blackmail that was happening. Because if you even objectively look at even the composition of the bipartisan team, you know, these are people that meet every day. Almost all the members in the bipartisan team are actually members of the House Business Committee. If you look at all the members of the bipartisan team are leaders at the National Assembly or at the Senate. So these are the people that, whichever these issues are saying should have been raised, they are people who would have raised them at the floor of the House, at the National Assembly or the Senate, where it matters. Because all these declarations we make by the roadside are just declarations if they're not put into pieces of legislation, if they're not put into policy framework. So in summary, in as much as I congratulate the Azimio team for calling out the project, because the country was bleeding and we're doing poorly, and we couldn't have sustained it. It was bad, it was wrong, it was hurting our economy, it was hurting our businesses, it was hurting our image as a country. Last week, Trevor, we had a training in the US where we are looking for, in addition to negotiating for the trade agreements between what we're calling STEP between Kenya and the US government, we're also looking for extra funding for what we call the SBDCs, small business development centers across our counties, so that if you're looking forward to starting a business in whichever county of this country you go to, then you have one one-stop shop where you go to get, whether it's advice, or whether it's getting funding, and that's what we're trying to put up for the U.S. Senate and Congress, House of Representatives and Congress, and it got a big support. But one question that we kept being asked is, how are these protests going?
Yeah.
So we had come out from this Africa regional hub for economic development, for driving a digital economy, because we are leader in all these fronts, to becoming a country where you're doing very well, but
the protests.
What about the protests? So I must congratulate Azimio for pulling out. But I wish that we didn't have to come to this, because we had so many. We had too many people that got hurt that should not have been hurt by this protest.
Yeah, Manzo, what are your thoughts on this? Kuria is calling it a push for selfish gains and blackmail.
I don't think so. You know, we have a constitution, and I can assure you Article 7 allows Kenyans to demonstrate. And I remember very well in 2003, the Honorable Ruto and his team then in opposition organized a very big protest in town. And the President Kibaki allowed them to go on with their protests. Well, some Kenyans tried to interfere to stop that protest, you know, sponsored by some politicians from Kiambu. And later on, when we were making the new constitution, he's the one who proposed Article 37. So Article 37 is very clear, and the constitution has not been suspended, and no one has the capacity to suspend the constitution or any of the articles. So there is no blackmail. Protests can be conducted without distraction and without problem. It happens all over the world, including the USA. You saw protests in France, you saw protests in Israel, you saw protests in South Africa. What is lacking in Kenya is a failure of the Minister of Interior to make regulations under the Public Order Act. I have seen that they have tried to come up with a Maandamano bill, which already we have a law anyway, under the Public Order Act and the Penal Code, and there must be regulations. The last regulations were made by Amos Wako when he was Attorney General, the year 2000. They expired in 2011. All these years, no one has renewed them. They are the ones which regulate the routes you are going to use, the system you are going to use, and that is none of our failure. But I can assure you, the first time we wanted to have a Maandamano, there came a team. There cannot be double standards in the country. There came a team also from the business community claiming they also want to do protests the same day. The whole idea was to distract. You cannot have two protests on the same day. We had given sufficient notice. Police outlawed or tried to outlaw the constitution. And we are where we are because when we plan Maandamano, there is also government-sponsored thuggery. And I can confidently call it so. Some people allied to government sponsor thuggery. I can assure that that bus was not banned by Azimio supporters. The lorry was not banned by Azimio supporters. And I'm sure the police and the intelligence can give this information if they want. So if
how do you know this? Because that's the one thing that we've had the Azimio team keep referring to, that it was then the protesters. How do you know?
We know our teams and we have our marshals. And certainly the people who did that are not part of our team.
So does it then mean that the protesters are known by yourselves? So it's not a public thing? You know the people who are supposed to protest? Therefore, that means that you are sponsoring the protests and mobilizing people?
Of course, when we call for protests, people volunteer and come over to the protests. And we have marshals to make sure that there are no heinous activities within our protests. So I can assure you, we know our teams in Nairobi, we know our teams. I know my teams in Makueni. If I were to do a protest in Makueni, I will exactly know who is on board with me. But so far, you know, I haven't come to that yet. So I want to say Kainan was a conflict of interest. He knows very well he belongs to Azimio and has illegally defected recently. You know, the quitting of Jubilee has not been the way it should be done. You know, there are wrangles in Jubilee, they are in court about the leadership. And Kainan know him very well, and he's a member of parliament I've been with for many years. Know him very well, his compromised position and the conflict of interest. He kept, you know, on board while he knows he's from our side.
Shouldn't that be an advantage to your side?
I don't think so.
Considering that this is someone who somehow may be able to read from your script because he sees from both ends. Therefore, there's no conflict of interest. He was on your side initially. Now he's moved to the other side. Isn't that supposed to be an advantage to your side?
Unfortunately, you can't rely on him as a politician. And the moment we raised an issue, then he has to be replaced so that our team is our team. He's now part of our team, but from the other side. So he's our team who is not our team. And therefore, it is good that he finally withdrew. And I want to tell you, if President Ruto, in the first place, started with the bipartisan or accepted the first petition and agreed to deal with the IBC issue, there would never have been any protests in the country, no deaths would have ever occurred in the country, no illegalities would have been committed, and all of us would be keeping our constitution. So I really blame it on his advisors and some people who've been pushing him, you know, to do some of these activities he's been doing. I know he would have meant well from beginning. He would have accepted the bipartisan. If I were him, that's what I would have done from beginning. And even the first protest would not have been there. And when it comes to issue of conflicts, he should have been the first one to withdraw Kainan. Why was he keeping him there? So protests are in the constitution, and Kenyans cannot be stopped. When the business community protested and came to parliament, and it was very vicious, they did not damage anybody's thing. Police did not interfere with them. But I can assure you, if police fired one tear gas to the business community, it would have been more chaotic than what you are seeing with Azimio. So let the police not interfere with the demonstrations. Let them just guard security. Okay. You saw members of parliament, you know, not harmed, just do their usual duty, go to the office of the president in town, and you tear gas them. Really? Okay. That is a crime against humanity. In fact, it is a crime which can be prosecuted at the ICC because it is towards a certain group of people, of a certain class of people, by the government properly mobilized. And I think it is illegal, and this is now why we are losing confidence with the international community. Okay. They can see we have our constitution, we don't follow it. They can see the pretense with the current government. Okay.
Nerima, do you see the needs of the ordinary citizens being espoused in this whole conversation, or has it now just become a push and pull between, as they say, the bulls are fighting, so the grass is hurting?
Thank you, Trevor. Good morning. It's been an interesting conversation over the last few weeks. In the beginning of it, the conversation was about the high cost of living, slowly changed into IBC and opening the servers, quickly became political, and all about interests. And I say this because now we are focusing a lot on individuals, and individuals in particular. We have just talked about Member of Parliament, Kainan, but also looking at the conversations that the bipartisan talks will have. We're seeing what's coming to the fore is about particular offices, and then we're also touching on an election that, quite frankly, a lot of Kenyans are still in campaign mode and exhausted from campaign mode. So I do not think the focus is on the high cost of living, because even when I look at the cover of yesterday's newspaper, there was a picture of Honorable Sabina Chege and former President Uhuru Kenyatta. Pictures speak much more than words, and I say that frequently. In that particular image, the former president seems to be larger, and it was a headline, and Honorable Sabina Chege's picture was very tiny. That is a sense of humiliation. What we're seeing here is petty politics, individuals who are bitter because of decisions that were made in the past, and people are now playing out those ambitions in terms of feeling their interests have not been met, and then they're using the political fora to bring about that anger. That is what I'm seeing right now. I believe that we are losing focus because the high cost of living truly is an issue to the Kenyan people right now. And honestly, our leaders do not have the time for these squabbles. The Kenyan people are in a lot of pain, and I'm sure we know that, because even today in the front page of the Nation, when we look at the performance of the key economic sectors, on the downside, new jobs have gone down. When you have a majority population that is youth, we need to be worried if they have nowhere to go after they're finished with schools. And even when we look at the performance of agriculture, food is going down. So if they are not working and they are hungry, we need to be more concerned. And when we're seeing that when it looks at ECD, space in primary schools, on the other side, there's an increase of birth. So when we see an increase of birth in a young population, because this is the population that is giving birth, that means they're spending a lot of their time together. They are not working. And so when they're producing...
That's an interesting analogy.
I'm telling you, people are not working. So when they're producing more and they're not working and there's no food and there's no jobs, it's a very serious problem. Serious.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned that our leaders are not seeing the dire issues and wanting to look past the political animosity and this fight of causing humiliation and embarrassment to one another,
yeah,
and focus on the bigger issue, which is how are people putting food on their table, access to opportunity and access to education needs to be key, and for the betterment of our country.
All right. I'll take a quick break right at the top of the hour. When you come back, we'll see some of your views coming through. We're still talking about this issue around calling off of the demos. There's a Mandamano bill, by the way. I think it was brought by the Mbeere North Member of Parliament. We'll see. We'll talk about that as well. And when the bill you're talking about, Manzo, was returned by the High Court to, at the time, it was Matiang'i was there, they said that needed to be amended. So should the Mandamano be restricted a bit more? That is a conversation we'll also be having in just a bit. And Nerime is calling this petty politics. All right? At Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. #Daybreak. See you in just a bit. Quick break.